All right, thanks everybody for coming. We're going to give a couple more minutes for the committee to join us and any of the public. So we'll just wait for a couple more minutes, maybe till 5:33.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Perfect.
Jen, it looks like James is he's on attend if you want to promote him.
Oh, thank you. I was looking for him. I will right now.
I will take care of that.
Oh, I got it, John.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. All right.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Beth, looks like we're at 5:33. So whenever you want to begin, please feel free to do so. You're muted, Beth.
I got it. Did Ophir join us yet?
No.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and start. All right, so bear with me. Here we go. So good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I wanted to start the evening off by reminding the committee. Actually, I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be the chair of this committee. I'm really excited about that. Very committed to Oxford, old and new. So I really appreciate your support. I did want to start the evening off by reminding us, the committee and the public, that the goal of this committee is to listen to information and data about the previous school site for Oxford. From that information, we will make a recommendation to the school board regarding the property. Please understand, we are not making specific recommendations regarding potential building options, playground designs, or anything like that. We will need to do a roll call vote if we need to go over 7:30. I'm really hoping we stick, excuse me, with 7:30. To be considerate of all of our time and commitment to this process, we'll do that roll call if we need to extend it. Again, thank you for allowing me to serve as chair. Another reminder, there's a digital binder updated as information is provided and or when the committee requests. That's online. Staff is working to add an FAQ, frequently asked questions section, for any public comment or additional information requested by committee members. Please also note that as requested, the BUSD Public Information Office posted notification of this meeting on the BUSD social media channels. Hopefully, continuing this communication will allow for more community involvement. And another item that I was notified earlier this week of is the resignation of committee member Georgia Maslowski. This means that the alternate, Ophir Kahat, and hopefully I'm saying it right, Ophir, will be taking the position of the committee member for the remainder of our meetings. Ophir, if you're here, can you confirm that you'll be able to commit to the responsibilities as a BUSD 711 committee member?
It doesn't look like he's here at this time, Beth, but if he pops on, then we can
do that. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So thank you. And let's move forward with our meeting. So first we'll do roll call. Please unmute and state here for the record. So Beth Ryan, I'm here. Kathy Campbell.
Here.
Dietmar Lawrence. James Rosberg.
Here.
Kate Collington.
Collignon, here.
Collignon. Thank you. I know. I'm sorry if I say it wrong. Phyllis Orick.
Here.
Stephanie Allen.
Here.
Winskills.
Here.
Ophir Kahat. So he's not present yet. All right. Hopefully he'll be joining us. Okay. So bear with me while I do this chair thing. Still sort of new to me in this formal setting. So our first agenda item is our public comments guideline. We don't do the agenda yet, Jennifer? No.
No, this is just to state the guidelines for public comment for non-agenda and for agenda items. And then this would follow suit moving forward as we, work through the agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the committee hears public comment at each meeting. There are 2 opportunities for public comment at each meeting. The first is for agenda items and the second is for non-agenda items. As the committee chairperson, I will introduce the allotted period of time for public comments, organize the comments, and indicate who will be speaking next. I think Jennifer's helping me with that. If you wish to speak, you must raise your hand, use the little icon thing before the comment period begins so you can get in line to speak. If you raise your hand after the comment period has started, you will likely not be able to speak during that comment period. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person unless there are too many people requesting to speak, in which case the committee chair may limit comments to less than 3 minutes. Okay. We good so far?
Yep.
Fabulous. All right. So first we're going to go to approval of the agenda. So I'd like to request someone to make if we want to approve the agenda. Somebody want to make a motion?
So move.
Second,
Great. All right, roll call vote for approving the agenda. Beth Ryan, yes. Kathy Campbell.
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie,
yes,
Wynn,
Yep.
Ophir? Not yet. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully he will show. Then we need to approve the approval of the minutes for November 2nd, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move. Second.
Thank you. And roll call vote, me, yes. Kathy,
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie,
yes,
Wynn? Wynn?
Sorry, I was far from my mute button here.
Oh.
Yes.
Ophir? Oh, Ophir has to abstain as he was not officially, he was not a voting member yet last time. Okay, so now we move on to non-agenda public comment.
There are no members of the public at this time.
Oh, okay. Do I still read the?
Nope.
Oh, so that's it?
No, I can move on.
Oh, great. I love using our time well. All right, then we move on to agenda item, district legal counsel presentations. So we are supposed to, we call for any public comment on this item before we begin, right, Jennifer?
Yep, but again, no public. So hopefully, somebody will come during the presentation, but you can just move on to the team.
So we'll introduce Jessica K. Johnson and Rachel K. Brilliant. They are both from Dennis Oliver Kelly, attorneys at law, and they are going to do the district legal counsel presentation.
Great. Thank you, Beth, and welcome again. Thanks for having us. I am Jennifer. Are you going to pull up the slide deck? Okay, perfect. And I'll just tell you when to advance through it. So we can go to the first slide. Next. All right, so just a quick agenda of the topics that we're going to cover in our presentation tonight. We're going to do a quick review of the duties of the committee that you're committed to participate on. We're going to do a roadmap of the tasks that you will complete as a committee. We'll provide you with a surplus property concept overview from the legal perspective, get into some details about what we mean when we say the highest and best use, discuss use of proceeds. Depending on how a property is used, there can be restrictions on how the money that comes in is spent by the district. So we're going to touch on that. Then we'll round out the evening with potential recommendations for use and zoning and a discussion of zoning. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide, Jennifer. And this is just a quick recap. These are the statutory requirements, the duties that you will be fulfilling as a member of this committee. We just want to remind you, you're going to be looking at the enrollment and other data with respect to the Oxford property. You want to be working to establish a list of priority uses for the property, so you determine that it is surplus to the district's needs. We want a circulation of a list of uses for the site within your community, so your community can hear and provide input with respect to your recommendations. We're counting on you, or the district is counting on you, to use your expertise in the various fields within which you are representative members to finalize and make determinations about tolerable limits of the space and the real property at Oxford Street. We also, the final product that you're going to be producing again is a report to the board, to the Berkeley's school district board, with your recommendations as a committee. You can go to the next slide. And then quick reminder, that is when your work is actually done as a committee. Once you submit that board with your recommendation to the school district at that point as a board will review your information, review your report, and they will make a determination of whether they're going to move forward with your recommendations or accept or reject whatever you have in your report. And so that is sort of an encapsulation of the overarching duties and the space that the responsibility that you all are going to be working to complete. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, Jennifer. So this, we wanted to provide some more clarity about just pragmatically or procedurally what you will be doing as a committee, right? So this is sort of an overarching map of what you will be doing throughout this process. So initially, the committee is learning the legal framework for the process. What are the responsibilities of the committee? What kind of information will you be reviewing? What are you expected to produce? You're going to analyze and discuss the site-specific data that is provided or requested for the Oxford site. You're going to, as you go through this process, request any additional information that is desired. We've started to get some requests for some of that information. So some of that additional information, for example, with respect to questions about zoning, will be provided this evening. You're going to work as a community to discuss potential recommendations for your report and recommendations that will ultimately be for the board to consider. You want to obtain community input throughout this process. You are certainly the representatives of a variety of pillars of your community, but it's very important, and the legislature intended for you to make sure that there is also community input above and beyond the specific members of this community. And that's why, for example, at the top of the call, we've been talking, there was, notice that the district is putting notice of these meetings through its social media outlets. And there have been these meetings are publicly noticed per the Brown Act, et cetera. As you continue on throughout the process, you're really going to be working to come to consensus building with respect to the recommendations for the Oxford site. That consensus building will yield a draft report, a report that can be prepared for your consideration, and that report will list your recommendations for the board, and then ultimately the committee itself or the chair will present that report to the board for ultimate consideration. So we can go on to the next slide.
Just adding on to one point Rachel mentioned about analyzing and discussing site-specific data. Every member of the committee has a responsibility to educate themselves and review the site-specific data and reports that is provided by the district in order to have an informed discussion. So please keep your responsibility to review those reports in mind before each meeting. There'll also be FAQs provided up on the website as well. So public involvement. This is a little confusing because if you look at the big picture, you think, well, wait a minute, we're supposed to have public involvement, but there's only a hearing at the end. And how do people, members of the community, provide their input? Well, so at each meeting, there's actually numerous opportunities for the members of the public to provide input and make comment. It's not just at the hearing at the end. So every single meeting, there is a public comment period about agenda items, and there's also a public comment period about non-agenda items. So I think public comment on agenda items, that's self-explanatory. If it's on the agenda and someone makes a comment on that specific item, then that would fall under that category. Public comment on non-agenda items. An example of this is really rare to happen, but an example of this might be, let's say there's a charter school in the area and they are gunning to get this property and they really want it. And they show up at a meeting and the agenda doesn't have anything about, charter schools or discussion of ideas for the property. It's just all, I mean, if we look at our last agenda for the last meeting, that didn't have anything where public charter school interest would be relevant to the agenda. So someone from a charter school, a rep, could show up and speak at the on the non-agenda item and say, we're really interested in the property and we really want you to consider charter schools. That would be an example of public comment on a non-agenda item. Remember that there's submission of questions to the committee email. You can also CC the chair so that the chair is also in the loop. And then at the end of this whole process, there's the public hearing. And that's when the hearing will actually be specifically on the recommendations you guys. But again, there's opportunity at every single meeting, numerous opportunities at every single meeting for members of the public to be involved. Another thing is that the materials that are provided to you, the reports, the FAQs, those documents are also available to members of the public and they're presented to the community. So the community is informed as well, in addition to committee members. So, if you have friends or neighbors that want to stay involved in this process, you can encourage them to review those documents as well. Next slide.
Jessica, I believe Kathy has her hand up.
Okay.
Kathy, did you have a question?
Yeah, and Beth, you can always let us know how you want us to handle questions, but I just want to make sure then whether individual committee members have responsibilities. It's sounding like no, that we're meeting our responsibility through the various structures that you've just described, and that's all that needs to happen, or whether there's an expectation that we are doing things with our particular constituent groups. So if you could clarify that.
You're talking about reaching out to, members in your neighborhood specifically versus allowing members of the public just to show up?
Well, I represent teachers on this committee, so that's who I'm thinking about, but other people represent administrators, other people represent local businesses. I'm asking about all of that.
Sure. So there's not a obligation to do certain things in terms of reaching out. I mean, this is a public meeting. Are you able to, talk, get feedback and share it here, or let people know about, meeting days and times? Then that's all allowed. It's really within kind of the scope of what you want to do obviously within the confines of complying with the Brown Act and whatnot, and not overstepping your role as a committee member. But no, there's not a set list of items in terms of public outreach that each individual community member is responsible for. You are responsible for keeping yourself informed and educated about the documents and the topics that are being discussed, and showing up to the meeting and whatnot. And making a recommendation, and we're going to kind of go through what those responsibilities look like. But in terms of, specific obligations to reach out to people that you represent, in terms of representation, the way the committee is set up is it's supposed to be a representative committee of the community, and that's why the statute specifies, there needs to be someone who represents or is a teacher in the district, someone who's a neighbor, someone who's in the land use industry, because it's supposed to be representative of the community, but it's not necessarily that you are, advocating for teachers. You're just a representative of that group and checking that box on the statutory list because that's the role you fit, if that makes sense. I don't know, Rachel, else to add to that?
No, I think you stated it correctly. Yeah, there isn't an onus on you as an individual to go out and solicit participation or specific involvement with respect to this process.
Okay, great, thanks.
There are two other hands. I didn't notice who went first, but if it's okay, can we call on Stephanie and then Phyllis? Stephanie, you want to share your question?
Yeah, no, I did this before for Hillside. And really, it's up to the public if they want to come in and participate and ask questions. It's not our job to go out and solicit it. And I'd like to get through this procedural stuff so we could get to the meat of the meeting. It's getting kind of redundant, if you'll excuse me, and we can all read.
Okay, well, I'm going to move really quickly and let us get through our presentation. And the sooner we get through it, the sooner we will get.
We had one more question, but I appreciate what your sentiment there, Stephanie. Phyllis, did you want to add something or ask?
Yes, thanks, Beth, and thanks, Stephanie. And I agree. I feel like we've almost used 1.5 meetings on just process, but I understand when the lawyers are there, we have to do that, you know. I guess one question would be to reframe Kathy's take on it from a different angle. Would there be a mechanism for us to have a public discussion, not a free-for-all, but a public discussion that we could then advertise to the people we're representing? One shot, and I know it could be, but that's just a thought. It's some kind of way to incorporate it into our work rather than just waiting for someone to drop in between 5:30 and 7:30 on a Wednesday night.
So I'm not quite sure I'm understanding.
I think there's an opportunity, and they can email the capital facilities at busd.net. But we could also put up on the webpage, I can see if we can do that, like a public comment form. That maybe is a way that you can get some more outreach from the community, and have the public information officer post that out on social media, you know, kind of to the point that you're saying, Phyllis, like, we really want to hear from you, even if you can't come to the meeting. That's something maybe we can do. John, am I missing any other opportunities that we can do as a district?
No, I think that's probably the best opportunity. Excuse me. And once we can create that form and post it, we can also have our PIO do like a social media blast on that again.
One question about the social media is that the media announcement I got was from Trish McDermott, because I subscribed to the BUSD newsletter. And so I got that. But that is, and I maybe BUSD tweeted it, but I guess what I'm talking about is if we're sitting here having been chosen because we represent the constituents that the district is concerned about hearing from, is there a way that we could have a one-shot gathering of those constituents that we could reach out to and say, you know, they just want to hear your thoughts. They don't want to sit down and listen and have 2 minutes of public comment, and just have that be a tool that we could use to go beyond the 7 or 11 of us that are representing these people.
So unfortunately, we need to follow the parameters of the Brown Act. And so the way that's set up is that members of the public do have that opportunity to come to these meetings and provide public comment. There's not supposed to be, you know, a dialogue of something that's not on the agenda, because these are public meetings. So
I guess I was saying maybe there could be an adjunct meeting or an ad hoc meeting or a meeting outside of this process under the Brown Act, but that could then still contribute to our ability to make a decision that the community will endorse.
So maybe that's something that we could think about more, or legal could look into, but I'm
Thanks,
not
Beth.
sure.
I didn't mean to get
Yeah.
in the weeds on this. I
No,
totally
no,
want,
I
I
hear
agree
what
with
you're
Stephanie. I
saying.
want to get into the real stuff. So, I mean, you know, thank you.
So we do have 2 more hands, so we'll keep going with that. Dietmar, did you want to add something, and then we'll go with Kate?
Yeah, just a clarification I'd like to have. So under the Brown Act, is there anything wrong with us mentioning, without going into any substance or having a meeting outside of a meeting, which is obviously not allowed, But is there anything wrong with us telling anybody we want to tell that, hey, there's going to be a meeting about this subject next Wednesday? If, like basically the same way as I think Phyllis's question was that, this is advertised through channels that the general public typically doesn't follow. So if
Sure, no, DMR, you can let anyone you want know that's not a violation of the Brown Act. Just don't send an email with all the committee members CC'd on it, because then that would be a violation of the Brown Act. So no, but you can absolutely individually tell people, let them know, give them the information however you see fit.
okay, thanks for the clarification.
And Kate?
Under the Brown Act or otherwise, are there subsequent steps after we make our recommendation that do involve that larger public conversation?
So we're gonna, the next slide, actually, if we could actually just flip to the next slide. I mean, there's a process that goes beyond after you guys make the recommendation. It's a very long process. And this is a handout that actually all of you have in the FAQ. So I'm not going to go over it, but we provided it because I think there was some questions last, where you fit into this overall process and how this process works, and the board consideration of the 7-Eleven committee report. That's that little yellow box up near the top of the whole flow chart. As you can see, after that, there's numerous other processes and steps that the board needs to take. And of course, at each various step, depending on what that step is, every time the board makes a decision, there's obviously public hearings on that and whatnot. So there are processes and steps and opportunities for public comment outside of after this committee ends and as this process continues. And of course, members of the public can always show up at a board meeting and make comments there as well, regardless of whether this particular item is on the agenda or not. So, this is just a big picture, and that's why, again, I'm not going to go over it in the interest of time. You all have this handout available to you. You can all read it, but we just wanted to make sure you have this information available.
One quick question. Members of the press can attend these too, right? And report on it.
Anybody can attend.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm going to jump in here and just give a quick definition of what it means if you'd make it the recommendation. What is surplus land? So that basically means in this context, it's property, real property that the district does not necessary. It's not necessary for the district's purposes. The district is not necessary for them to use the property. So that is sort of one of the floodgate question. Ultimately, is this property surplus properties? Is it surplus to the district's needs? Is it not necessary for the district's needs? So you can slip to the next slide. This is what you're determining as your committee. This is your mandate for your work here. And so how do you make this determination about what the best possible use is of this excess property should you determine that it is surplus? So that's where you can slip to the next slide. We're going to talk about highest and best use. So the framework you're going to use to help you make that decision is the highest and best use. This can help you frame up recommendations for use of the property should you deem it to be surplus. The legal definition is found not in a statute. A lot of the law that we've been talking about, there's specific statutory provisions. This is found in the case law. There are four main elements of the way you determine what highest and best use is. So we have provided a couple definitions from legal sources from case law. The second page is from the Appraisal Institute. You can also you'll see reference and discussion of the appraisal report of highest and best use in that. But just at a high level, the four pillars would be, it has to be a legally permissible use, it has to be physically possible, and it has to be geographically and economically adaptable or acceptable to the community. So that is that's kind of the high level, and we can get into it further, but in the interest of trying to speed this on a little bit, you can move to the next slide. This is again saying the same thing. This is where it comes from. So as you can imagine, this is not black and white as far as what is highest and best use, and that's why you're going to work together as far as forming a consensus on what that may be, what it would look like using those criteria of legally permissible, physically possible, financially feasible, and what's the maximum productivity for the real property. So then at a high level, we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to remind folks that this process, to the point Jessica was making, this is just the first preliminary step in a much larger overarching disposition process. So you form the committee, you make your evaluation. The next is the board will consider that committee recommendation. You'll move to public offerings, public bidding, et cetera. So there's a variety of steps, and that's what's outlined in that 2-page document. This is just helping you frame the sort of the limited scope of what the mandate is for your community, for your committee, and what you're working on in the purview of the 7-11 for Oxford. So we can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this is if the board, this is what would happen when the board you can put up all the bullet points at the same time. Great. Oh, one more back. If the board makes the decision that they're going to, agree with your recommendation, should the recommendation be a surplus? If that is the recommendation, there's a legal process that has to be followed. These are the steps to it. It's, a formal resolution. They have to declare it surplus or exempt surplus, regular meeting, written findings. So again, this is just helping you couch or get perspective on the place what we're at right now and what the mandate of the committee itself is, your committee is. And you can go on to the next slide. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but should your recommendation be that the Oxford site is surplus to the district's needs, it's not necessary for the district's needs, and the district's board accepts that recommendation, the recommendation would actually be that this is exempt surplus land, and that is because it is going through the 7-11 committee process. So what this has to do with is the as you'll see in the overarching 2-page chart, the variety of offerings that need to be made. There are offerings under the government code and there are offerings under the education code. The government code offerings, the district would be going forward with the education code offerings. Again, this is a bit granular, so we can move on. All this just to say, this is just the very beginning of a long process. Another important point that is a good point of reference for this committee is that the manner in which the district uses the property or disposes of the property there's limitations in the way that capital or that money can be used. So if the district, if the committee's recommendation is that the property Oxford site property is surplus and there's a recommendation to sell or lease the property with an option to purchase, so that money that is collected from that sale or that purchase, that transaction, it's for capital outlays only, or some with limited exceptions, some maintenance costs. So it's not something, for clarity, that's not going into the general fund of the district. So it's restricted. There's a restriction on that use. However, if the district ultimately decides to lease, so for example, if the committee's recommendation was, we recommend surplusing the site, we think leasing to X, Y, or Z is the highest best use. Those proceeds could be deposited into the general fund, on an annual basis. So we won't get too much further into it other than those are that's useful parameters for this committee to have an understanding of the potential of uses of finances depending on how whatever recommendations are made, and then obviously the ultimate board decision on the use of the property.
Rachel, we have Stephanie has her hand up. Can she
Oh,
go
yes.
ask her question? Go for it, Stephanie.
Yeah, my question is, if we decide the property is surplus and should be sold, are we limited in making any additional comments on what we think it could or could not be used for?
No, you're not limited on making a specific recommendation or multiple recommendations. So you could say, we recommend that the district declare the site surplus. We recommend a sale. We recommend a sale to a private academy, private schools, or community services and entities that are providing community services, for our community. So you can make.
Slightly
Can we
different.
get the next slide? Because this actually is the next slide covers this question.
We do have a couple more hands up. So Dietmar was next and then Kate.
Yeah, just to, I mean, basically this slide seems to confirm that, but the definition surplus does not automatically mean a sale, obviously. So
No.
surplus by definition, that is, it's taken out of the, like the core function of the schools, of the school district. So it's no longer a school, but it could be other uses like workforce housing, for example.
Yeah.
And remain property of the school district. It does not automatically mean a sale, right?
Yeah, so let me be clear. Yeah, just because you declare a property surplus, or that's the recommendation this committee makes, what that does not mean that the district is going to sell it or lease it. It's not definitive of what the district would do to dispose of the property. The surplus determination is literally a determination that the property is not necessary for the district's use. So I want to walk through.
Rachel, next slide, because all these questions are on the next slide.
Yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide.
Okay, really quick though, Kate, is your question kind of in line with the other questions, or do you have a different question?
I literally want to make sure I'm understanding the slide correctly,
Okay.
which is that if there's a sale or lease of the property with an option to purchase, the revenue from that comes back to the school district, whether for capital or cost of maintenance. If it's purely a lease, it goes back to the city's general fund or to schools.
No, schools, all of the money goes back to the school, but it's the general fund of the school or capital outlay of the school, of the district.
The district can take an exemption. So these limitations, I mean, this is what the statute says, but the district always has the option to seek an exemption from CDE. And for example, if they sell the property and CDE says, yep, we'll grant your exemption, you can put the money in your general fund, that is an option. So this is just an overview of what the statute is and what the limitations in the statute are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be, exemptions sought.
So any revenue though goes back to the schools.
All of their money back to the school.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have Stephanie and then Kathy.
No, Kathy was ahead of me.
Okay, Kathy and then Stephanie.
I think it'd be good to explain to people what capital outlay means and the limitations of that, because I think we don't all understand what the difference is here. And I can do it or someone else can do it.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in. So for example, capital outlay would be like building construction of new school, a new school site, an extension on a school, modernization. Those are kind of capital costs. The general fund is a different set of money where you're going to be using that to pay things like teacher salaries. So they're actually pretty distinct buckets. And I don't know, Jessica, if you want to jump in more. I don't know how granular you want to get on this, but that's at the high level. One is more for construction, physical upgrade and updating of facilities, actual facilities access, and then limited with use of maintenance of those facilities. Whereas you could also use that to acquire property, but the general fund is a broader scope, and
there's more flexibility with the general fund.
Stephanie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my memory might be failing me, but if the district decided if we said it was surplus, the district agreed and they decided to sell it, there's a hierarchy of who has the first right to buy, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's not a charter school.
No, that's what's in that chart. And so we encourage everyone to review that chart, because that process is outside of the scope of what your decision you're making. We're not covering that tonight, but that information is in that chart. And
no, I think it's important for people to understand, if you declare it surplus, the decision as to selling it is governed by a set of priorities that are not ours to make.
Yeah, that is true. And that's all covered in that handout. So, I mean, in the interest of time, we can go over it now if you like.
I know it. I just want to make sure that at some point when we're talking about the decision, that's made clear as to what that hierarchy is.
Yeah, and that chart is a general overview. It shows the process from start to finish in general terms. It's not specific, obviously, to this site. So for example, it has in there information about the Surplus Lands Act. this particular property would not have to go through the Surplus and Land Act checklist because it's going through a 7-Eleven committee. So that's just a general overview of the whole process for, you know, a fictitious property. It's not specific to this this particular property. Can we go? Right?
Yeah, so in interest of time, to make sure we cover this and get to the other sections, let's keep it rolling. Thank you.
Okay, so there was a number of questions on potential recommendations, and so we just want to kind of go over this with you. So the first decision you're going to be making is, you know, number one, is the property surplus or is the property not surplus? And that's going to be your recommendation. If you make the recommendation that the property is not surplus, then basically the property remains as is. It's subject to the same constraints that it has now. Now, the board may not choose to keep it not surplus. They may decide to surplus it anyway, but that could be one of your recommendations. And then you're done. Property is not surplus, you're done. There's nothing else to decide. If you make the recommendation to surplus the property, then you can also make an additional recommendation in terms of, you know, how to dispose of the property. Now, if you decide to surplus the property, it's important to note this doesn't prohibit the district from still keeping the property, from still using the property for district purposes, for workforce teacher housing. The district can still do all of those things if you decide to surplus the property. But by surplusing the property, you open the door for them to be able to do additional things if they so choose, or as you recommend. And some of those things that require the property to be surplus are selling the property, leasing the property with options to purchase. Your recommendation can include limitations or contingencies. For example, you may decide you want the district to lease the property, but you only want them to lease it for 5 years because the housing market's not looking great right now, but in 5 years it might be in a better place. So you want to have a limitation on that. Or you may decide that you want them to sell it, but you don't want them to sell it to a charter school. You can make that limitation recommendation. In terms of contingencies, you know, an example might be that, let's say the district receives a lot of responses, a lot of interest from numerous different groups, and your contingency is, well, you want them to sell the property, but you want priority to be given to, you know, community service type tenants, either, you know, someone who's going to have a childcare facility there, or someone who's going to, you know, operate a senior living facility, whatever it is, whatever the contingency is that you want to put on your recommendation. I think the most important part of this slide for everyone to know is that you can make multiple recommendations, and it's encouraged that you do make multiple recommendations. There may be some members of this committee that really want this site to be a park. There may be members of this committee that really want this site to be housing. There may be members of this committee that really don't want this property to be used for anything but district purposes. You can make multiple recommendations, and that's fine. That's acceptable, and that is, you know, totally within the purview of what you're tasked to do. So keep that in mind later on in the discussion when you're discussing, you know, different ideas and kind of what everyone's thinking, that it's okay that, you know, you don't have to all be on the same page about every single idea. There can be multiple recommendations made as long as the committee agrees on those, you know, collectively, those recommendations. Next slide.
Phyllis does have a question.
Just a quick question on the options. Is there a swap option that you could trade the property with another non-BUSD property?
So that is an option that wouldn't require going through the 7-Eleven committee surplus process to make that recommendation. That's kind of outside. So again, if you make a surplus recommendation, you're not prohibiting the district from doing that. So that could be part of one of your recommendations. It's just not required to surplus the property to do that, which is why it's not listed as an option under the surplus options.
Thank you.
Okay, so zoning at the Oxford property, real quick. I'm going to go through this super quick because you guys have all this information. So the property is currently zoned residential, single family residential with a hillside overlay. Basically, that means that it's for single family residential homes, but there is an option for community facilities. I don't want anyone to get caught up on the zoning because this restriction, because there are numerous avenues to put a different type of use on this property. That you have a handout that is all about, the zoning restrictions on this property, language from the municipal code, and also talks about zoning change process, variances, use permits, very different mechanisms through the city of Berkeley to put a different use on this property. I also want to mention that just because the property is zoned this way, that doesn't preclude a workforce housing. There is a new bill, AB 2295, that after January 1st, 2024, does remove some of the administrative barriers to school district property in terms of putting workforce housing there. There are a bunch of conditions in this bill and certain criteria that have to be met. And so it's not going to work universally for all school districts or for all properties, because certain properties may not be able to meet that criteria. Some of the criteria are there needs to be at least 10 units on the site. And, there's affordability standards that need to be met. 30% of the units need to be affordable to lower income. So those are just some of the criteria under AB 2295, but it does, basically it streamlines the process and makes it more efficient and quick for school districts that decide they want to use district-owned land for workforce housing to kind of bypass that zoning change process that would otherwise be required. So that's pretty much an overview of the zoning. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I want to let you guys get to your discussion. So again, all the information is packaged in the FAQ for you to review. And yeah, hopefully that's it. But let me know if you have questions.
We have one question. It sounds like we also have to do a lot of homework. So reading that packet, so just remind folks of that. Yikes. Stephanie, you had a question?
I'm confused, actually. The zoning that you're talking about, is that for the surrounding neighborhood, or is that for the actual parcel of land that is the old Oxford School?
That is for the parcel of land. Now, as I mentioned, it has that community element, so it can have community buildings there, such as a school, which is why but yes, no, that's the specific property piece of land. It's also the surrounding community, but yes.
Okay, I'll wait till later on. Thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, if we have questions later, they can email them to the Capitol email and mine, and we could answer those at the next meeting.
We can either answer them at the next meeting, or if they're a quick, short answer, we can add them to an FAQ. So yep, definitely. If anyone has questions, please email to the chair and to the Capitol facilities, just so we can make sure everyone gets a copy of them. And I will make sure the entire committee has the chair and vice chair's email.
Okay, we're close to being on time, so I just want to remind us of that. But we have another question, Phyllis?
Yes, just following up on your question, because I did email a question and then I worried I was going to violate the Brown Act if I CC'd all our fellow board members. So is it possible to share the email questions we're sending to capital projects with everybody here on the 7-Eleven? Or is that a Brown Act thing? So no, then therefore, yeah.
Sorry, Phyllis, for cutting you off. That's absolutely possible. What we'll do is I will compile all of the emails that we've received and then put them in your in the meeting folder, so that you
perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. Sorry about that.
Okay, so are there other questions related? I'm sure there's a lot. I need to go.
Kate has one.
Okay, there's one in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Kate has one. Did I hear you say that this is
it was a yes or no question? Was it? Did I hear you say that because we're going through 7-Eleven, it's not subject to surplus lands?
It's not subject to the offerings, the public offerings. And so to the point that another committee member was making, there are a lot of steps after this process and who gets offered to buy the property, et cetera. So it would follow the education code provisions for offerings as opposed to the Surplus Lands Act. And there, the statutory reference is in this PowerPoint. It was a couple slides back, so you have it.
Thank you.
Other questions related to that? All right, again, feel free to email them and Jennifer will follow up and help us with that. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I want to go back, just a reminder about how Georgia has to resign from the committee. So this means our alternate Ophir Kahat will be taking the position of the committee member for the remainder of our meetings. Ophir, can you confirm that you're able to commit to the responsibilities as a BUSD 711 committee member?
Yes, I can do that.
Great, thank you very much. Okay.
Sure.
All right, good. So wonderful. We had our district legal counsel presentation, and now we are going to move on to our school site facilities information led by John Calise, our executive director, and Jennifer. Jennifer, are you part of this too?
Yeah.
Okay.
She is, and I'm actually going to ask Jennifer to run point on this evening. Just not feeling myself right now, so she's going to take care of this for me.
All right, great.
Let me share my screen real quick. All right. Okay, so at our last meeting, thank you so much. We went over the digital binder and where all the reports are. Hopefully you had some time to review that, but you know, one of them is over 400 pages. So we, you know, maybe you didn't. And staff just wanted to make sure that we spoke to some of the higher level points of each report and then answer any questions. And if then we didn't have the answer, we would go back to our subject matter experts that prepared the reports and get you that answer and provide it in the FAQ. So tonight, I want to just walk the committee and community through the actual site. This is the site that we're discussing, the Oxford school site. It was originally a school site and operated in 1909, and then it was reconstructed in 1965 to its current capacity. It's a one three-story building. The multi-purpose room actually is the only level that is a single level. It is 3 stories. The building area is 32,624 square feet, and the site area is almost 55,000 square feet. And as legal stated, this is zone R1 each single family with the hillside overlay. So getting into some of the geological hazard report. This is a presentation that was actually presented to the board in 2019, I believe. And it's linked now on the digital, the entire presentation is linked now on the digital binder for you. But really, it's just to walk you through some of the work that the committee has, or excuse me, the school district has gone through regarding this. So really, it all started out when the district was going to modernize their site, and they realized that they needed this the study. And as part of that process, it kind of unfolded into even more work and more exploration, which led to the fact that, you know, the site is now closed for student use and move forward. So this is a timeline I'm not going to go over, but in 2019 there was a board presentation, and then in October, and then in November the board actually adopted to close that site and move the kids to the new campus. Okay, some of the things, these are the key findings, is really this site is actually located in a very active landside complex, and it's moving, and it's been for years, right? So what's important is that it's actually moving about an inch a year, and what the geologist said is that it will continue to move. So again, this is, you know, the story. So what I think is important about the next bullet, and that staff says is, it's important from the geological hazard report, is that it's that this 6-year-old building, it's moving and it's doing pretty well, but it's still in everything's kind of moving in that area. It's not just our school site. All the homes are, but again, we are required to have the second safest schools in the state of California. And if we know that there's a hazard to these levels, we got to get those kiddos off, right? So from a residential standpoint, all of the houses, everything's going the same, but from a school perspective, we're held to a different standard. And so that's really important to note. And that's why the kids were moved and we're in this process as we are.
Jennifer, let me jump in real quick.
Yeah,
Move to the next slide, if you would.
Yeah, definitely.
So really what it comes down to, right, is that this, I just, in the interest of time, I want to kind of give everybody the condensed version. If the landslide were to go active in a large geological event, what's been determined is that the site can move anywhere from 2 to 20 feet. Now, that in itself is a tremendous problem. And while it's believed that the buildings will perform well, the largest threat is that due to the already constrained sizes of the streets, it is believed that they will not be able to get first responders in and out of that neighborhood safely and quickly. And that's what really drove the decision to make the recommendation to move the Oxford campus. The buildings themselves, safe, built to code, built through the state architect standards, but it's really just about the access and then the ingress and egress from that site. And I just, again, doing this in the interest of time for the committee, happy to take questions. And I asked Jennifer to sort of lead this just because I've been talking nonstop all day and my throat's killing me, but I'll let you jump back in there, Jen.
No, absolutely. Thank you, John. If there's any specific questions, please let us know. If you had some time to review the study, great. There's a lot of great information in there. But again, the study is on the website, and then also the slides from the original, and then these will be on there as well. Are there any questions specifically regarding the geological hazard study? And I see there are some things in the, is there anything in the chat? Okay, sorry.
No hands.
No hands. Okay, we'll keep moving on. Okay, the appraisal report is the other report that was out there. So that report is as of September 12th, 2022. It conforms to the standards that appraisers have to. It's not, the district saying, we want it to be appraised at this. It's a private appraiser that is very familiar with your community that appraised it, been in the area for over 60 years doing appraisals, and they're independent. That means they're not related in any way to Berkeley Unified, and they're upheld by this Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice Act. So the purpose of the appraisal that they did was to review the property as is for the evaluating of the site for your use. So that's what they did. Some of the scope, they physically came to the site. We met them on site. They physically went to the site. You'll see in the report that there's pictures of the site and the surrounding area and neighborhood. They looked at, did additional research regarding the schools and the composition, and then any other opportunities that are specialty opportunities for property market related. And then they did some highest and best use, because that was their the task that they were working towards, is what was the highest and best use for this. So they looked around your area, Alameda, and also the Bay Area in regards to pricing for highest and best use. They did qualitative on sales, cost, investment, all of that's included in this. Okay, so the conclusion, 2 takeaways, right? They evaluated the property, highest and best use, value $2 million. If it was vacant, some of the things you already know, the 54,000 square feet, it's in a landslide zone. It has also elevated high fire risk and fire zone. And especially there was a lot of consideration and discussion about if there was a landslide, what that would do to the site in general. And then the zoning is the R1H. I'm not going to belabor that because I think legal did a good job on that. But if you have any questions, I can answer it, or they are answered in the appraisal. As improved, which means with the existing buildings on the site, what is valued? Well, the buildings are 60 plus years old. They aren't suitable for public use. There's possibility for a private entity to own them, but not again for public funding, and it would have to also conform to the zoning of the current zoning. It is prohibited for any type of school use. I think that was brought up at our last meeting in regards to charter or regular public or private. Right now, no school use under California Department of Education. As a private entity, it might be something else. What they did note is the demolition and replace isn't really feasible. It would cost over to replace an elementary school right now. It would be about $110 million, and that number is only growing as time goes by. So it's financially infeasible to replace it. And then really they spoke to the highest and best use wouldn't be to keep the physical sites there. It would be to wait, continue to keep them vacated, and then at the time that the property, if sold, it would be to demo them and rebuild new. So it also said, based on this methodology, that public use and funding isn't supported. So that's a super high level overview. I see that there is a hand. Are there any? Go ahead, Stephanie, with some questions, and then Kathy, you're next.
Are they saying that because of the value that it wouldn't be economically appropriate to sell it for a park?
In regards to park, no, that's for the public use. Investing public funds into this isn't feasible. That's a recommendation. They're not saying that it could be supported.
I still don't understand that. And that's my same question. So maybe.
Okay. Definitely let me get a little bit more detail, and I can confirm with our appraiser and have that maybe clarified in a written format from them.
Yeah, that would be good. I think that would be helpful. Any other questions? Wynn has a question.
I mean, this might be way jumping ahead, but with valuation, say a park was what the city wanted, is under that valuation, can the district do a swap with the city, or does it have to really be a sale?
There's opportunities if the property is surplus under your purview of that recommendation, then there are opportunities for the district to engage, but that would be at the board level.
Other questions? That presentation is bringing back a lot of memories. We went through that a lot. So, whew.
Well, wonderful. I'll get it posted up online for the committee, and then I'll also, Jennifer Kerr noted the question, and we'll get that answer back to the committee regarding that. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, there was also a request by Kathy to put the link to the FAQ in the chat if possible, or maybe can you, if not now, maybe email it to us.
Yep, I will get that for you.
Thank you. I've muted myself. Okay. So we're doing really well with time, which is great. So we'll check about extending it if needed, but hopefully we can stay within our 2 hours. So after hearing the information from legal and clarity on the process and additional information on the property information, Dietmar and I would like to lead the committee in a discussion regarding the next step so that our December meeting, we can focus more closely on formulating a recommendation as we move into January. So to help us move along. So basically, these are some of the options we can recommend. We want to get a little bit of a pulse of how the committee's leaning. So if everybody's feeling one direction, we can get all the information we need. Or if we're all over the board, we figure out how to proceed. So in general, and I cleared these, so we could sell a property to an outside party, sell the property to the city, convert the property to workforce housing, convert the property to a park, or any combination of the above. That's sort of the general purview of what our recommendation can be. Does that sound right, Jennifer?
Can you
Yeah.
put those in the chat, Beth?
Ooh,
Maybe in shorthand?
sure.
Those
I
are,
just,
the items that, I'm just gonna do a little clarity. The items that legal went over and kind of us highlighting are not specific, right? So it's not that you have to pick one of those and say, hey, this is what we want to do today. Maybe Beth, you might want to lead a discussion and get input from all the committee members and kind of just go around that, just to understand where, maybe 3 minutes is sometimes a good amount of time for everybody to kind of say their feelings and see what type of information they need.
Should I put it still in the chat? I know for me, I like a list.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I'm almost there. Hang on.
Okay.
Convert,
thank you.
it's not cute, but. All right, hopefully that helps a little bit. So yeah, maybe we can just open it up if people want to start and share what they're thinking or what additional information you might need. So Stephanie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I was involved in facilities when this happened. When the first engineering report came back, and then when they dug that gigantic hole and put a guy down in a basket, and when he came back up, he was white-faced, right? I mean, and there was considerable conversation at the Bond Oversight Committee and other places about this. And I'm just going to tell you my reaction, and it's not set in stone by any means, but this is my initial reaction. If I had a house up there, I'd be selling it and getting the hell out of Dodge. But I am very concerned about this property being used for any kind. First of all, I am adamantly opposed to it being used for children in any fashion, any kind of school at all, public, private, charter, whatever. I'm extremely concerned about any other use that would involve putting people up there, in my opinion, in harm's way. Anybody who thinks there's not going to be an earthquake, is not dealing in reality. And I just think we need to be extremely careful in our thoughts and our recommendations about potential future uses for that property. My preference, frankly, is for it to become a park. But as I said, I'm not set in stone on that on any means whatsoever. But those are my initial thoughts, and I'm anxious to hear the conversation and get, so we can figure this out in a consensus way.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Somebody else want to share their thoughts? And like I said, if we can keep it about 2-3 minutes, that would really help. I'm sure people have their opinions.
Maybe I would go next. I agree with Stephanie about definitely no children up there, and it's also seconding what John explained earlier, that one of the core reasons there is not necessarily the building itself, but building you can build in a way that it wouldn't collapse even if it moves around on the side. I mean, it's done with modern building standards, and it's been proven in earthquakes in Japan. But the issue is the access for first responders, and then there is something about the site as you look. It's really at the periphery of the slide zone, so it's really a block or two in from the perimeter of this. So that's somewhat different than being up in the middle on very narrow winding roads. The site is served by 2 streets that are a block away from Eunice. So it's on that side. I wouldn't kind of rule it out on that count, because in that case, really the only responsible thing would be, I don't know, to get everybody out of there, because there's thousands of people living right around it. And, so I think I would want to at least entertain the potential for workforce housing. Especially as if it remains owned by the school district under AB 2295, which Jessica mentioned earlier, it really has the possibility to streamline the development of that. And if the school district is, planning to do workforce housing, this is one of the sites that by definition would not be in conflict with educational uses in the future. And I'm saying that because if the city is set for growth, going from 110,000 to, I don't know, 150,000 in the foreseeable future, it's a larger city. It will have more kids. It will need more schools. And land is a scarce good. Nobody's going to do more Bayfill to create another school site. So I think that's a consideration to look at the long-term needs for the city in terms of affordable housing. And so I would not rule this out that early in the game, but it needs scrutiny. I agree with that.
Thank you, Dietmar. Would somebody else like to share their thinking? James?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Dietmar. My bias is to add a housing, some kind of affordable housing or workforce housing. But the emergency access is a concern. And so I was wondering if there's any information we could get about what the impact would be on emergency access if more people are residing in that property. If there's a city department that could inform us about that, I think that'd be helpful. That's where I am. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Jennifer, we can get that. Cool. Great. I think Phyllis and then Wynn.
Hi, thanks. I too, since I live a block away from the workforce housing site that's being built at the Berkeley Adult School, I think, and I have a child who is a teacher in the Berkeley system, I'm viscerally very aware of the need to have affordable housing for all of our middle income and lower middle income workers. So if there were a way to make this site contribute to that, I would be very supportive of that, which brings me to a thought again of the idea of a swap of some sort, and perhaps thinking of other, I know we're only considering this site in this committee, but we have the Oregon Street site that is now unoccupied, and we have a temporary leased situation for the maintenance vehicles in Richmond and on parts of the Berkeley Adult School. And I'm just wondering if there might be a way to have the district repurpose this site for something that supports education without children being involved, that would then also free up land and resources to build housing either there or at the Oregon Street. And I know we can't talk about Oregon as a surplus property, but just a holistic look at things. But I also do think it'd be very interesting to see, since the appraiser thought that 10 to 20 single family homes could be built there, then maybe we could be building 100 units like we're doing down at on San Pablo in Virginia. So I'd like that to be in the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Wynn, and then we'll go back to James.
Well, I guess Phyllis sort of touched on it, but I think before we spend much time at all on the idea of any workforce housing, we'd have to understand what the zoning in the city really look like. I cannot imagine the zoning density there is anything close to what would support a viable workforce housing. And it'd be great to know if we were taking that off the table right off the bat or not, before we spent too much time on that. And that's just a matter of, again, the egress, access to the space, side of the space. I think when they said 20, they're talking about single family homes. Workforce housing is much more dense than that.
Thank you, Win. Can I share my thoughts, having spent a lot of time on that campus? And then, Kate, I think, Dietmar, you mentioned about down the road, if we need another school. The problem with that site is it is small. So it's always going to be limited as to how many kids would ever be there, even if they rebuilt. So I think that's something to consider. The getting there, having a lot of people, I think the neighbors, as sad as they were for us to leave, because it, brought kids and fun and joy to the community. There is also the aspect of the traffic and how many cars parking and how many often cars would get hit. And that would be my worry about any large workforce or anything else big going in there, because I was fortunate I had a parking spot in the driveway, but for everyone else, it was really tough. So I think that's the emergency access is huge. The number of people you can actually bring into that neighborhood has to be considered. And I think a school, even in 10 years, I would be concerned. So that's sort of my thoughts. Kate, and then Dietmar.
Based on the site information, as well as the fact that we're even having this conversation, I can't imagine that this is appropriate for future school use. And so would be comfortable saying that this is surplus from that perspective. In terms of future use, I would be uncomfortable recommending this for open space for parks, in part because of the significant cost associated with building that out and maintaining that, at minimum, without significantly exploring the opportunities for housing. I don't understand enough right now to understand how this works for workforce housing. And I think workforce housing means a million different things in terms of scale, in terms of income, and we could articulate how we're actually defining that. And usually requires some degree of subsidy, but would be very interested in understanding what the potential for that would be. And if it can't be, is it's just a revenue generator for the school district? I mean, I think we'd all like to see for a site of this magnitude, something that's a little bit more, value generating for the community than more single family homes. But again, unless, as Dietmar said, we're planning to make a statement that this is not an inhabitable neighborhood because of the longer term issues, like we should be finding some longer term contributing value here.
Thank you. Dietmar?
Yeah, two clarifications. What Beth said, then I did not mean that this site would ever be a school again with increasing school population. Clearly not. What I meant is that if workforce housing needs to go somewhere, that would be a place that would basically leave other sites available for school expansions. We are dealing right now with the adult school parking lot being filled up. That is a large contingent site. And anybody who followed that process that knew that I fought it and advocated for a distributed approach that goes into the nooks and crannies that are not suitable for school use, such as the Oxford side. And so just to be clear on that, and also, as I said at the outset, I agree with what Stephanie said, that no school, even though you could allow a private school there, I think that's not a good idea, because it's children are children, whether they're in a private or a charter school or a normal public school. To Wynn's point, like the highest and best use in both scenario really leads to what they call single residential development. But that's a very narrow view, at a very narrow interpretation of the zoning. In essence, the report also states that the site is large enough for 11 conforming parcels. So it's really a question whether it's very simplified. If you look like a monopoly house approach, you divide it into 11 parcels and you put 11 big houses there, 4,000 square foot, and kind of somewhat commensurate with the neighborhood, big houses in the hills for folks that can afford it. But now you apply, SB 9, which allows then each side to be divided in half and put a duplex on each. And suddenly you have, instead of 11 4,000 square foot rich folks homes, you have 44 average 1,000 square foot housing for teacher, all affordable. And that's, that's kind of 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, various mixes, essentially like townhouses. It would be exactly the scale that zoning and the general plan intended for the neighborhood. And it's more a question of what are the legal venues and which type of workaround do you apply to prevent it from being like 4,000 square foot large single family houses. And that could be, and that's really, a high level thing. Is this AB 2295? Is it SB 9? Is it a density bonus approach? There are ways to do this, but I think that's the scrutiny that needs to be put in. And I'm not sure how far we as a committee need to go. We just need to know that if we're making that recommendation, that it doesn't go into la-la land, that is at least an avenue that allows this to be more than 11 big houses for rich people. But, like something in the range between 30 and 45 units, which makes this worthwhile as teacher housing and for concerned neighbors in terms of traffic and impacts, having like 30, 35, 40 teacher households there within 1 or 2 blocks of multiple bus stations, within walking distance of 4 schools where they could work. That's far less of an impact than having 16 classrooms with 30 students and the school staff and all the pickup and drop off. It's a very different ballgame in terms of neighborhood impact, and also a very different ballgame in terms of like emergency access. You don't have hundreds of kids running in all directions after an earthquake. You have adults that can help each other and walk down 2 or 2 blocks to be in a safer environment. So I think it's really something that needs consideration. So we should not close the door on workforce housing.
Okay, thank you, Dietmar. I do want to make sure other people have a chance. Kathy and then Stephanie.
Yeah, I really appreciate this discussion, and I think it's very rich. I am mostly thinking about our next meeting and what I would like to know more about. So at our next meeting, I would like some slides on AB 2295. And I'd like to really understand that better. I'd also like some slides on the potential of this site for workforce housing. Now, obviously that can't be in depth, but it is kind of speaking to Dietmar's view. I want to say that I agree with Dietmar that I don't think the zoning right now we should consider that much. And I think we've been told that multiple times, and we've been told there are ways around things. And so I think we should have a really open mind. So I'd like something, pretty coarse, like, is that really an option for this site? To the
Kathy,
point
can I
where
ask a
it's really
question?
just like, do we need to eliminate it, or could that be a recommendation that we make? It can be pretty simple, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Kathy, can I ask a clarifying question real quick?
Sure.
Just because you said you'd like some slides on this as workforce housing, as far as in regards to basically the law around the use of it, or what, because the site hasn't been studied for housing. I just want to make sure that we give you what it is you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of to address Wynn's point. Maybe a couple of times we've gotten an oral list of all the ways around the zoning, but
Mhm.
maybe we get that in writing
Got it.
and we
Thank
get
you.
reaffirmed. But
Okay.
also if there's a knowledge within the facilities department, like, no, that is not even an option. Like, I think we want to know that now. Maybe there isn't, but I think there may be things we're not thinking of where facilities people are like, terrible idea.
Okay.
Here's why.
No, thank
So-
you. And I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
All
And then I also wanted to ask, it could be part of the next meeting. If we were to recommend workforce housing, I think we're not recommending sale or lease. The word used in the presentation was conversion. And I just want to make sure, like, it really isn't sale or lease. It's put it to a new use. Is that right?
We will confirm the different opportunities that are available with workforce housing for you in some of the things that you request. So that can be something, you know, can you sell it to a developer and recommend workforce housing or affordable housing? That's different than the school district making it a school district workforce housing. So there's a couple different options, but we can definitely bring that to the meeting with the content behind it.
Okay, and then I'm aware of my time. Here's my last thing. I don't know what is the right way, and it may be not this committee, it may have to be the board, but I don't know the right way to be thinking creatively. I mean, a swap really is not within the realm of this committee. So I guess those are just other conversations. But I was interested in the idea that, you know, we can't put our maintenance department, in my opinion, at this site. I just personally think that's wrong, given the history of Oregon Street. But I'm interested in, you know, does the city have a piece of property that would be really great for workforce housing? And the city has an interest in the park, in a park at this site. It seems like that discussion is going to happen elsewhere because that's swap and we're not swap. So maybe we can get clarity on that at the next meeting. So.
Yep, I'll get that. I added it to the list. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Stephanie?
Well, I'm a little confused. I'm a big fan of workforce housing. But the problem, of course, that comes to my mind immediately is financing. The current facilities bond is pretty much committed. And we're talking about a significant amount of money to build workforce housing of any kind there. And if you have a developer do it, the developer, the money for development does not include a large amount of affordable units. It just, the city has had this problem. And if we use school district land for workforce housing, we want it for teachers and staff. So the first question that comes to my mind is, where's the money going to come for that? The second question I have is, I still have a serious concern about putting people up there, given what we know about the potential danger of the site. And then the last thing is zoning. Whatever the city's zoning is in that general area doesn't, to my understanding, and maybe John can correct me, does not control what the school district does with that land. Unless we sold it, then that's a different matter. But the school district is not subject to the same zoning restrictions that other entities are. But anyway, I'm still thinking out loud. And I like Kathy's questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't remember who was first, Dietmar or Phyllis?
Phyllis, why don't you go first?
Okay, thank you. You're still muted, Phyllis.
Dietmar, you go first.
Okay. I think this was an interesting question for John. Like, is the school district held to the zoning or not? I mean, what is your, maybe if you could answer this quickly.
Yeah, it depends on what we're using it for. If we decided to try to use this for workforce housing, we would have to work with the city with zoning, but then there are some variances, as legal explained earlier. If we use it for school use, then the school has no say, then the city has no say in it. If we were to rebuild it as district use, but not student use, like plant operations, what was suggested earlier, the city would absolutely have a say in it. So then they wouldn't allow it up there, I'll tell you, just because of the high traffic, the trucks, et cetera, right? So it really depends on what the actual use is as to whether or not the city gets to weigh in.
Okay, thank you. That answers it. And I think you know, as for myself, I can say I can't see any maintenance operation up there. That's not the right site for it. I think the site, I'm looking at the benefits of the site. What are good criteria for workforce housing? And I see many of them met up there: the proximity to schools, access to public transportation. And but I agree also with Stephanie that you need to figure out, is it safe, and how can it be done safely? And from a cost perspective, in one consideration from a green building standpoint, the greenest building is the one that's already there. So, well, that's why I was interested at some point to walk through the building and look at it. Maybe, you know, I get an engineering opinion on it beyond the geological report. Because if the building is intact and acts as a raft, it would just move with the side. Then, you know, like there's 16 classroom size rooms plus additional ones for administration. Yeah, if they could be turned into loft style teacher units, there's 16 to 20 units. You add a bathroom, you add a kitchen, you do some renovation to it, spend 200,000-300,000 per unit. You know, that's going to be the most affordable and most quickly available teacher housing you can imagine. That's cheaper than the conversion of the Golden Bear for homeless housing. But I'm just kind of throwing out kind of some ideas here, avenues to consider. And in terms of the zoning, the report quotes Steve Berkeley, city planner, and I think that would be the person to help us get our bearing on the city's outlook on zoning and potential avenues to expand it past the very narrow definition of 11 large houses. And would it be, I think, I would be interested in having him join us for one session to answer our questions on that. And so what do others think about that?
No.
It seems like that's sort of getting us out of what we're in charge of doing, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, we're first have to decide if it's surplus or not, and it sounds like we're sort of leaning towards it's surplus. I mean, the thought of putting kids there again. Oh, and I'm sorry, Phyllis, I'll come back to you. So I'm not sure if you know, we're going in a direction, and Jennifer, you might have to clarify, that isn't really under our, I mean, we're making a general recommendation, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so as a committee, you want to first, as legal stated, determine if it's surplus or not surplus, right? And then if you determine that it's surplus, then at the highest level, you know, you can put forth some recommendations, recommend workforce housing opportunity or affordable housing, recommend selling it to a developer. And, you know, knowing that the housing element was just released, right, that there's a need for additional affordable housing, you could mention some things like that, or a park or whatever the committee decides. But getting into the level of details of how many units or unit type isn't necessarily the committee's purview, and that would be discussed at the board level, or once it's sold off, you know, and they do negotiations with someone to purchase it. So again, keeping it more focused at a little bit higher level, knowing that there are, you know, I think Dietmar, you mentioned a ton of different opportunities. Again, that's not for this committee to decide what those opportunities look like. It's to decide, we really support workforce housing if that's something that you support, and then put that forth in the recommendation, right? We want you to surplus it. Workforce housing is incredibly important. BUSD board, this is how we feel about that. And then that would be it. How it goes from there, again, the level of detail and kind of getting into that would be beyond your purview.
That makes sense. And that's when you get involved with the school board, going to the board meetings and sharing.
Absolutely. There's a total public process through that avenue at the board level. So definitely.
Right. I want to make sure, Phyllis, we come back to you.
Yes, this actually is something that I did email the projects people about, and it was a question of, and Stephanie has experience with the Hillside, but there's also the Crowden School site, the Berkeley Adult School, affordable housing along Francisco, and other places. I'd be interested to see, and maybe like 2 slide decks of previous decisions to surplus properties. And if there are any previous decisions not to, where they were and what the highest level of decision was, just to give us some kind of context.
So we did receive that comment in regards to surplusing previous properties. If it was deemed by the board, I think there was only one time, and I think Stephanie, obviously you probably have more familiarity if you were a part of that committee. There was only one time that the board went through a formal surplusing 7-Eleven committee process. For property, other properties were kept within the district and reutilized in different opportunities. I want to keep the committee focused on their task at hand, and it really is the Oxford site. And so knowing that legally by ed code, the board, if they determine something or want to surplus it, they have to go through this process. I don't know how much kind of getting into past surplusing or property use, as it's not within the purview of this committee. So I want to be a little bit careful on how much information is provided in that instance.
Just a quick question, is that a statutory thing that the statute was not in effect? When did this statute come into effect? I'm just curious.
I can get you more information on the statute. Yep. Districts can decide, it's not unique to BUSD, districts all throughout the state. We can sit on property and we could close a school, we can sit on property, we can purchase property and not use it for school use. There's different requirements under Title V when districts do go to purchase property, but there's no rules against us just sitting on property or using it for other use. So it's only when a district wants to or feels the need that it's, kind of like in this case, what could we use this for? The board has determined that it's unsafe for the USD. They feel that way. That's why they put it forth the recommendation to potentially surplus it if that's what you feel you'd like to do. So it doesn't have to happen in all cases of just vacant property or property that's not being used for schools. And yes, that is ed code. The surplusing 7-Eleven, it was mentioned in a couple of the slides, but I can definitely make sure that that's just one of the FAQ or on your digital binder, the ed code, so you have it really clearly at one click.
I guess I'm just curious because I live right next to the Berkeley Adult School, and there's affordable housing was built sometime in the 80s, I'm not sure when, on what was a playground. I don't know the process for how that happened. And Crowden School now occupies what was the original Jefferson School, now Ruth Actie. That is not BUSD property. So they got rid of it somehow. And so I'm wondering if that just happened before this whole thing happened, or if, so this is really the second time there's been a 7-Eleven committee.
That I know, John, I don't know if you can speak into
This is
that a
the
little
second
bit.
time, this is the second time that there's been a 7-Eleven committee. The properties that you're asking about, Phyllis, those were actually not surplus, those were long-term land leases. So those are actually still owned by BUSD, the property, and they're operated and built upon by other entities under land lease.
And that would not be an option here.
What, to lease the property?
Yes, to an affordable housing developer, for instance.
It would be, as explained, yeah, that was one of the first slides that legal showed today, was actually that this committee can make the recommendation to sell or lease under surplus.
Yeah, it's just a little confusing. I mean, I don't think we should belabor it, but it is confusing why those didn't have to go through this process to be leased.
It is,
When
yeah.
that's one of our options.
If they're, because they were vacant properties, like Crowden School, and I don't want to get into it too much, right? Crowden School, I believe, was done prior to the 7-Eleven statute.
Okay.
The land that the affordable housing was built on by the city on Francisco Street, that was actually an empty lot and it was owned by the city, but because there was no building on it, it didn't have to go through that process. And that might predate the 7-Eleven process, the 7-Eleven statute, but I would have to double check that one.
And you said it was owned by the city, not by the
No,
school
owned
district?
by us. That
I see.
land is actually leased to the city on a
Okay.
99-year lease where they built that affordable housing.
Okay,
No, these are great questions. I appreciate them. Thank you.
I think there are, Beth, really quick, just doing kind of a pulse check on all members. There are, I don't know who didn't speak up. Ophir, you get to speak now because you are a committee member. So if you have any input, please unmute yourself and provide that.
Be careful because he's driving. So
Yeah, or I can unmute you. I'll ask to unmute.
Yeah, let's not distract him. We don't want to have an accident here.
No, we do not. Let me find him. Ask him.
do we want to go with the other hands? Well,
Yeah, of course.
okay. Why don't we go Dietmar and then Stephanie, and then hopefully we can get to here.
Yeah, so it seems the prime mandate and the elephant in the room is to surplus or not to surplus, to put it Shakespearean. So it seems like there's nobody in this group that I have heard advocating for it to remain a school use. And that's really what it comes down to, whether we declare it surplus or not. Is that something we should just put a motion out, or is this too early to do that, or what's anybody's feeling here?
I think it's safe, Dietmar, to do like a straw poll, if you will. I wouldn't suggest doing a formal motion at this point because it is very early and the committee absolutely wants to make sure to do its due diligence, right? But I think doing like a quick straw poll is absolutely appropriate at this point, Beth or Dietmar. So
That makes sense. So if we're leaning, if we think, yes, it's surplus, maybe not sure. And then, oh, it's
Yeah.
right.
Why don't, it would be helpful for Jen and I, if you do think it's surplus, raise your hand on the Zoom. And if you don't, then it's just a little.
So surplus is raise your hand means surplus.
Means you would surplus it. Raise your hand. That's
Yeah,
this,
okay.
that is easier for us. Sorry. Thank you. Stephanie, did you have your hand
Stephanie?
raised?
Ophir is gonna have to just raise his hand because we don't want
Raise your hand up here. Okay.
or not either way.
And Kathy, I don't know, you're she had to step away, but it looks without Kathy, it still looks you know, everyone except for Kathy, and she might come on. She may have
And
to-
James, are you uncertain at this? Oh,
Yep,
okay,
he raised.
great, thanks.
Okay.
So we sort of, at least we're guiding our work, right? So that's good. Stephanie, did you want to add, you had something else?
I just wanted to say about Hillside, I don't know if the 7-Eleven statute was in effect then. I don't remember, you know, that we had that large a committee. We made the decision fairly rapidly to surplus the site when we recommended to the district they sell it. And we expressed our opinion that it was not a good site for any kind of school. Subsequently, I think it was sold to some kind of private school and they just couldn't make a go of it because the cost of seismically upgrading it was so significant. And ultimately it got sold to this Swedish multimillionaire who's up there playing around with it.
Finnish, I think, right?
Finnish. Yeah. Anyway, my point is, we told the district it was surplus and to sell it. And they made the decision from that point forward. We didn't.
Okay. Ophir, do you want to add, do you want to share your thoughts? Jennifer, can you unmute him or can I? No.
There you go.
Hey, first, I'm sorry I wasn't expecting being in the car driving all this time, so I couldn't participate as much as I wanted to. But I have to say that from my like from a value point of view, not value in terms of money, but in terms of our values, I would love to see housing there. I think it's when we look at the prices nowadays and we look at the young generation struggling, I think if we do have the opportunity to do something like that, we have to make the effort. And I understand that it's not in our hands, but it's still, even just saying that, I feel has some kind of a value to it. So, and in terms of density also, I understand there are parking issues and there are density, there are neighbors and so on. But again, the young generation are suffering. They can't afford anything, and we want to drive them out of Berkeley. And I see it all the time. I'm lucky enough to own a house, but too many people aren't, and too many kids of other people can't stay. And so if we can somehow help with that, I would like to contribute there. So that's all I have to say.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment or have questions?
Kate has her hand up. Kate, I don't know if you
I'm
still
sorry, Kate.
have it up from before or if you
I
wanted
just,
to.
I just wanted to keep voting, so I just left that up.
Right, we'll just keep voting. This is great. Jennifer, I don't know if I can put you on the spot. Can you sort of summarize what we might do at our next meeting to make sure we've hit? I took
Absolutely.
notes. My notes are itchy scratchy.
Definitely. I think there's work from staff and from my team to bring back. The other Jen is taking vigorous notes, so don't worry about that. But talk about emergency access was something that was brought up. You know, the bills on housing that were a little bit more depth or provided on the digital binder, the ed code, workforce housing ways to work around zoning, facilities opportunities, the swap. You know, there's just a lot more kind of generally going towards housing. So staff will come with some of that information and in a presentation. Again, we heard you know, loud and clear, more time for this robust discussion. I think this was incredibly valuable. So we will do a high level and then be able to answer questions like we did tonight, John, myself, or anyone else from our team that we bring in. There were a couple clarity items about the appraisal, so I'll definitely get those answered for you. And then I think the next step is that the committee would then, you know, with more information, would take a, you know, vote or a motion to, you know, move to surplus and then start deciding on what direction they want to draft their recommendation. And so legal did mention that there is you know, some boilerplate that we have because it, you know, it's required in the language to make sure that you're, you know, checking all the boxes. So we will provide a draft that has, you know, certain areas that you'll need to fill in. We'll have that available for your review in December, so that when you come back in January, you'll be able to, you know, have a thoughtful conversation and start potentially drafting a recommendation at your first January meeting. Does that sound good?
We have 2 questions. Again, Kathy, do you want to go first and then Dietmar?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm sure that legal will assist with this, but if a vote to declare surplus is helpful at the December meeting, and if it's separate, and I think it is, then I just want to make sure we agendize it really clearly so the public knows that we may be doing that. So.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Kathy. Anytime when you're going to take something for a formal vote, we would agendize it. There will be an opportunity for public comment on that, and then for discussion from the committee. So yes, that will be agendized.
And is it a separate resolution and a separate vote to declare surplus?
It would be a separate item that is not part of discussion. So we will have it as a separate item.
Right, but my point is the decision to declare surplus separate from the recommendations?
Correct. Yep. You can
Okay.
motion the surplus and then you can work on your recommendation. And as legal stated, there will be an opportunity for a public hearing once you have your draft report ready and out for public review. Then the committee can open it up for a public hearing, entertain any additional public comment, and then move forward with a vote on that draft report that would go to the board.
All right, Dietmar and then Stephanie.
Yeah, so basically assuming that we will vote yea or nay on the surplus status, then the next thing is the recommendation. And somebody mentioned earlier, it might have been Kate, about learning more about AB 2295, which Jessica brought in. And I think that is going to be a critical component for making a qualified recommendation when it comes to the decision, preferable lease, preferable sale, because in a sale situation, the public interest loses a lot of leverage in terms of streamlining and the ability to do what ought to be done potentially. So I think that's relevant to our recommendation to understand the benefit of keeping it in ownership and doing, for example, a 99-year lease, as John explained, was done on other sides. So
Yes,
can we get this, can we task the lawyers to give us a briefing on that?
I did have that written down, so that will be part of the packet.
Thank you, Dietmar. Stephanie?
I just want to know if somebody can draft the resolution on, so we're not fumbling around, when we get there, the resolution on to surplus or not. I mean, I think the clear sense is that we want to recommend surplus. The conversation is, do we want to make any further recommendations to the board as to what they should do with it if they decide to accept our recommendation?
Yes, staff can prepare and work with legal to prepare a resolution just for the surplusing portion. And that would be part of that item. So it'd be surplus and then it'd be a resolution roll call vote, which you already do because we're on the Zoom.
Okay, Dietmar, did you want to say something else, or you're just keeping your hand up?
No,
All right.
sorry, I forgot to take that
That's
one.
okay. Is there anything else?
My dogs are hungry.
So am I. And I love it. I love it when we are on time or even a few minutes early. Do we have to have a motion to adjourn?
So
No,
moved.
there's no motion to adjourn.
I don't
Thank you,
know.
Beth. Great job.
Second,
Yeah, thank you, Beth, for running this so smoothly.
yes,
Yeah.
Beth,
Well,
thank you so much. It
Jennifer
was
helped me
really,
a lot. I couldn't have done it, but thank you all, and thanks for your patience. So I feel like we made some good,